Thank you all very much for coming this morning, and especially thanks to our presenters and panelists. And so I'll start off with just a very brief introduction to Ethical Reading. Ethical Reading is a not-for-profit community interest company founded in January 2018 and run entirely by volunteers. Our mission is to help embed ethics into the way we live and work in Reading, and our goal is to inspire, educate, collaborate, and we do this by running events and other activities, events such as this. Our three core programs are business ethics and culture, sustainability and workplace well-being, and business ethics and culture sustainability and workplace well-being. Under these, we have core initiatives such as Ethical Reading Recruitment, Trees for Reading, and Healthy and Ethical Workplace workshops. So I'm the host, and Dominic Hall is going to start off with a 15-minute presentation. Dominic is head of ethical business conduct at BAE Systems, and then we will have panelists present each for 5 minutes. And then we'll have Dominic reply, and then we'll go back briefly to an open discussion. Then we'll have Dominic reply briefly, and then we'll go to open discussion, and we will close on time. All right, so that's the last topic. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn over to Dominic.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, working. Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Brad. As Brad said, I'm head of ethics at BAE Systems. We have 85,000 people across the world, so it's a big organization. So the way we structure ethics is naturally different to how you might do it in a much, much smaller organization. We're 85,000 people. We make aircraft carriers, jets, those sort of things. It's that BAE Systems. So Brad asked me to talk about the practicalities of ethics in business. And I've got a couple of key points there I wanted to talk about. Firstly, is there a conflict between ethics and profit? Is there a cost to being ethical? And the second one, what are the practicalities to ensuring ethical behavior? Because for you to be ethical as a company, it's not enough to have an ethical mission statement and your board to decide you're going to be terribly ethical. Everyone through the company needs to reflect that and behave like that. And for us, when you've got 85,000 people, that's the size of quite a large town. And a large town has a police force and a prison. So it's complicated. Is there a conflict between ethics and profit? I would argue the opposite. I would say that behaving in an ethical way as a company is an insurance policy and is a way to being a more profitable company. But as I think I just implied, you have to be actively ethical, or things can go wrong in your organization despite your intentions, and more on that later. The kind of how that ethical behavior drives increased profitability. Well, firstly, it's through your staff. It's through staff attraction, retention, and motivation. And there's plenty of studies showing that graduates in particular, millennials, are attracted to companies they perceive as being more ethical, and they'll take a pay cut to do that. An interesting story on this, I mean, clearly it motivates staff, clearly it retains staff. An interesting story on this is Siemens. And Siemens had its big corruption incident a few years back. And they had a huge fine, and they had courts all over them and investigations, and it sucked up lots of management time. But the key thing for Siemens, the key cost for them, was over the next 5 years or so, they stopped being the number one recruiter for engineering graduates. They stopped being the first choice. And that first cut of graduates went elsewhere. They went to BMW or whoever, not Siemens. And they got second or third choice. That really hurt them. They stopped having the best graduates working for them for a few years, and that'll hurt them long term. The second issue, I think, is an obvious one around customer alienation. It's obviously very, very true for big customer-facing brands, sort of the Microsofts of this world, but also Tesco's had a small one a few years back. They were using cotton sourced from Ukraine in some of their T-shirts. The cotton was picked by kids. It was a big issue, and it was something 2, 3, 4 levels down their supply chain. It's the hardest kind of issue to spot, but it really hurt them, and it really hurt their sales. And that wasn't a big issue. It was a little thing, a small part of their business really hurt them. So stopping that kind of thing, again, it's an insurance policy. It is obviously true for customer-facing brands, but it's also very true for example, professional services firms. When I joined, I was an accountant originally. I joined KPMG 25 years ago, and it was the big 5 or 6 or something. And one of them was Arthur Andersen, and they're not around anymore because they behaved unethically. And it's that simple. They behaved unethically with their work with Enron, and nobody would hire them from then on based on their reputation, and they ceased to exist. So it's clearly true for them as well. The third point is around investor relations. Investors, and I'm mostly talking about stock market investors here, but it's also applicable to people who set companies up and invest in smaller companies. They're very, very, very interested in what we call ESG performance, environment, social governance. And this is so much truer than it was even 3 years ago. It's really moving up the agenda. All companies now are talking about a net zero target for climate change. And it's not just the kind of social performance investors before, the Hermes asset management guys. It's Goldman Sachs, it's BlackRock, everyone. They see it as an existential challenge for companies. Chevron, ExxonMobil had challenges, the huge American oil companies. They had challenges at their AGMs. They had 4 activist investors elected onto their board of directors. That's massive for them. That's absolutely huge. So, I mean, these issues are everywhere, and they absolutely have to be a priority for companies now. Exxon is probably an interesting example of a company that 30 years ago everyone would have thought was very positive, finding energy for the world, and now is seen as, well, hang on, your core business is causing climate change. So interesting company, that not set up with poor intentions, but the way it's going is curious. The key point for me, the key point from those 3 is that if you aren't a brand that depends on being ethical as your USP, you're not a body shop or whatever. It's that point about staff motivation. Well-motivated staff are simply so much more bought in, committed, and productive. And there's plenty of studies that demonstrate that the companies that perform well in various ethics measures, ESG measures, also perform better on the stock market, perform better in profitability. And that link it's not obvious whether that's correlation or causation, it's not obvious what that link is, but it's strong enough that I know for a period, I mean, they may still be doing it, Goldman Sachs, kind of the most hard-nosed of the American merchant banks, were using performance against a series of ethics, environmental measures as a proxy for management capability. Because management capability is the big thing in a company. How do you measure management capability? Incredibly hard to measure, very important. You can't, really hard to measure. You can measure your performance on something equally complicated, ESG performance. And if managers are doing well on that, they're probably doing well elsewhere. That was the theory, which I thought was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So clearly, I believe that ethical behavior is key to a well-run, profitable company. So that brings me on to my second point, which is around the practicalities to ensuring ethical behavior. And this is hard, particularly in an 85,000 person company, but equally hard anywhere else. And this is what I meant when I said earlier, you have to be actively ethical. It's not enough to just be ethical. You've got to routinely role model it to staff to show them that you value ethical behavior. When an organization loses its way, it's very rarely deliberate unethical behavior from the top. sometimes it is, and Enron is probably a good example of that. Actually, rather than Arthur Andersen, Enron itself. I need to stop using Enron as an example. I used it in a speech to grads the other day, and I got about halfway through, and I looked at them and I went, any of you ever heard of Enron? And none of them had heard of Enron. And then I went, when were you guys born? And then I realised I had a problem. My example predated them. The one thing I desperately want as a birthday present is a copy of the Enron Code of Conduct. That's something I want on my wall, because apparently they had a very good code of conduct, and it demonstrates that is not enough. But it's rarely that poor behaviour by guys at the top. It's behaviour. It's bad behaviour further down. And Volkswagen is a really good example of this. The Volkswagen emissions scandals recently, and Volkswagen are of course saying it wasn't company policy and it was a rogue cannon, a loose cannon, a rogue individual, and so on. But it does appear that it was a team that were tasked with reducing the emissions of the vehicles. But actually, they were tasked. The wording was bad. It's, we need to pass these tests, guys. Make sure our engines pass these tests. And the engineers went off and they did it, and they produced an engine that would pass the emissions tests. And they hadn't been told by the chief executive of Volkswagen, go and do bad things. They had not had sufficient guidance that Volkswagen always valued doing the right thing. And they clearly hadn't had sufficient guidance that if they had questions, they should speak up and ask about it. If they'd phoned up and asked, and they'd got through, if they had the ethics helpline process we have, one of them would have phoned the helpline, it would have come to me, I'd have told the chief executive about it, and it would have stopped. But they didn't have that process or that culture that encouraged those conversations. And I'm not saying that we're by any means perfect, and people would have fears in all organisations, but it's that lack of a process in there that stopped it happening. So what does a program that encourages and assures ethical behaviour look like? Well, the nearest we have to a sort of global description of what an ethics program, a program that encourages ethical behaviour and discourages bad behaviour, the nearest we have to what a global program should look like is something from the US called the Federal Sentencing Guidelines. And the Federal Sentencing Guidelines kind of do what they say on the tin. They are a guide for judges when a crime is committed and the person is tried in court. Sentencing guidelines tell the judge, this is the sentence you should give. You should give them 6 months to 9 months. You should give them a £3,000 fine or whatever it is. And it applies equally to companies as it does to individuals. So when a company comes to court, the judge will say your fine is going to be $10 million, $20 million. It'll be in this range. And one of the things that mitigates that range is, did the company abide by this ethics program that they set out? And so if you abide by that ethics program, it has two things. It reduces the size of your fine, tick, but also, and more importantly, it stops people behaving badly. So it's a very positive thing. So that sets out the 6 main aspects of the US Federal Sentencing Guidelines in this area. And it's risk assessment, standards and procedures, structure and leadership, awareness, communication, training, and reporting. So how do you do an ethics program? Well, number one, you do a risk assessment and you say, where are my key risks? Are my key risks that someone might bribe a customer? Is my key risk that someone in my supply chain might be using slavery? Is my key risk that people are going to behave in discriminatory behaviour in the workforce? What are my key risks? So you do that exercise. Once you've established your key risks, you say, right, now I need, number 2, I need standards and procedures over those risks. I need methods, formal methods of dealing with those risks. And you do need written standards in this area, however small a company you are, just to demonstrate consistency of approach, to show that you've got organisational justice. You're not just making it up based on how you feel about that individual. You're following rules, and people respond strongly to that. Now, for us, those standards and procedures are vast, and we literally have policies about policies. But for a smaller organisation, they can be much smaller and much less formal. You can just have a brief 3-page code of conduct which covers all these areas. So you've done your risk assessment, you've got your standards and procedures in place. The next thing you need is kind of structure and leadership to the organization. Now, leadership, you need to demonstrate tone from the top. The guy at the top needs to show that ethical behavior is valued by leadership. And that then goes all the way down the leadership chain. Every leader, every manager needs to demonstrate the importance that they personally place on ethical behavior to their team. And I always say to managers, it's not enough to be ethical. And I'm sure you are ethical when you're sitting in front of your laptop or you're in your office. You need to get out there and you need to demonstrate it in the workforce. And when someone in your team makes an off-color joke, you need to say, Jake, that's not funny. So I use Guy to be, as humans, we are we're a form of animal, and we all look. If you watch monkeys' behaviour, they'll look at the top monkey and they'll copy the behaviour of the top monkey, and we are like that. We will copy the behaviour of our leaders, of our managers. If our manager behaves well, we'll follow her example. That's how it works. And I talk about structure and leadership. The structure, you need to have a structure to allow the reporting of that bad behaviour to go right up to the top very quickly, as I said earlier. The fourth point there, you've got a risk assessment in place, you've got standards and procedure, you've got leadership. Do people know about it? Do they know about your standards and procedures? Do they know about the policies? You need awareness, communication, and training. And I can't emphasize this too much. You've got to have constant communication on this issue. People remember the last thing they heard. And I've got a great story about this from a Californian seminary. So a seminary obviously is a place where they train priests. So they're training Catholic priests. And if you're a trainee Catholic priest, you probably think of yourself as a good person. And you probably are a good person. You've certainly got good aims in life. So they've got all these trainee priests in a room, in a lecture theatre, and they give them a 1-hour lecture on the Good Samaritan problem. So they talk through the Good Samaritan, the parable, they talk through all the issues, spend an hour on this subject, and then they said to them, I'm very sorry, we've overrun. You've only got 60 seconds to get to your next lecture. Pack up your bags, it's straight down the corridor, first room on the right. So 100 trainee priests pack up their bags, run to the door, run down the corridor, through the door on the right. And they all run past an elderly man who's lying on the floor, groaning and clutching at his heart. And all 100 of them ran past him, having just done an hour on the Good Samaritan. But the last thing they heard was from an authority figure, you've got 60 seconds, get to your next lecture. That's what they did. That's what they've been told to do by the authority figure. So I cannot emphasize enough how much you need to do awareness, communication, and training from your leaders, from your immediate boss, to demonstrate that this really matters, because things can go wrong so quickly and so easily. Point 5 on there, helpline investigations. So you need a mechanism to let people tell you when things are going wrong. Because if things are going wrong halfway down your organization, you simply don't know it's happening. So you need a mechanism to let people, anonymously if they wish, contact the company to let them fix it. Or stuff, again, the Volkswagen example, stuff will go wrong down there. And you can't, however well-meaning, you can't just say, oh, just call me, just call the chief executive, just call the general counsel, just call the top lawyer in the organization. That's very intimidating for people, and they won't do it. When someone sees something that's not right and wants to speak up about it to get it fixed for that organization, that is the most important thing in the world for them at that moment. It's terrifying. They're terrified of being retaliated against, of being fired, and they won't do it if they think it's going to be face-to-face with someone important. They want a gentle way of doing this. So that's the point there. And the final point is reporting. After you've got all these in place, you've done your risk assessment, you've got your standards and procedures, you've got your tone from the top, structure, leadership, you've got communication going out, you've got a helpline system, you're managing incidents. You need a way of reporting on all of that, on what's happening to the most senior part of your organization, to the board, to demonstrate to the board that the program is working. And if the board don't ask for that regularly, then they're making a serious mistake. Then that is willful blindness. They're just looking for a VW type situation. So, as I say, those are the overall principles to encouraging an ethical organization. And having said all that, nothing beats a CEO who really, really walks the talk, who regularly stands up and says how important an ethical organization is to them. So, Brad, thank you. Who do I pass over to?
Yes. So the next is going to be James Parkin, who's Associate Director of the Eximus Group. And so I hand over to you, James. Thank you very much, Dominic, but we hand over to James now.
Thanks, Brad. Morning, everyone. So mine's a fairly brief presentation here. I kind of loosely called it "What if the ice breaks?" and as I go through this, you'll understand why. So I'm going to ask you to think about the reality of professional ethics in a challenging business environment, and highlight an uncomfortable but genuine decision we'll all need to make at some point if we are acting ethically in our businesses. As a recruiter, I deal with a lot of companies, and therefore I get to see how they all work, how the leadership undertakes decisions at various points, going back to what we've just been listening to, through the life cycle of their business. So whether that is recruiting, retaining staff, strategic planning, etc. And you find that ethics often come into play at the most critical times for a business. So whether that's hiring and firing, career development, so promotion and review season, whenever that is within your business, winning new business, credit control, particularly in a tough financial landscape that we've obviously all just been through with the COVID period, and cash flow being king for a lot of companies. And again, strategy and planning, thinking about the way you want your business to grow or be viewed or go forward. At all these points, there'll be differing views and opinions, and therefore potential conflict. So if we're interested in operating ethically and successfully, we have to accept that fair, ethical decisions probably come with some conflict and disharmony at the end of the day. And I want to focus on the recruitment aspect of that for obvious reasons, because my experience. So on Monday, I was very fortunate to go to an evening with Sir Ranulph Fiennes, my childhood hero. Guinness Book of Records described him as the world's greatest living explorer. Fascinating man. I recommend everyone go and find out everything you can about him. He's hilarious. He's brilliant. But part of his kind of talk, he was going back and remembering and looking at the recruitment process, if you like, for the people that have been on all of his expeditions over these decades, what he calls selection. And that was named after a book that his late wife actually had at the time when they were looking for a deckhand. And I've got to find this book. It's a bit like the Enron Code of Conduct. It's my dream birthday present. It tells you how to hire people for basically any job you can think of. And it boiled down effectively to motivations. And that's what he looks for. So it's a bit similar to the thing we see all over LinkedIn nowadays: hire for character, not skills. You can train skills. It's a kind of predecessor to that message, really. And one of the things he found is, if you boil it right down and understand what that person's real motivation is, if they've got one and it aligns with where you want to be going and what you need, they'll always work out, and you can train them at everything else. Interestingly, he found that people with a faith, not necessarily a religious one, but some form of faith, are often better suited to the types of work that he needed them for, and had a stronger motivation because they kind of had that voice that challenged them when they were at tough points. And so he was talking about obviously hiring people for Antarctic trips. What if the ice breaks? And he was saying that you go through and you find people based on the right motivations, but if you find you've made a mistake, fire them immediately. And of course, in his scenario, it's life or death. And when he was doing the talk on Monday, people a little bit of quiet in the room, maybe 1,000 people in the room. And he said, look, I get it. He said, that might sit uncomfortably with our sensibilities. He said, but trust me, when you're crossing the Antarctic, you can fire someone, but you can't get rid of them. But it's a valid point for him. You know, you don't want the wrong person at the end of your rope if the ice breaks. Now, in our business, all our businesses, hopefully it's not life and death, but it could be the happiness and well-being of other staff members. And is it ethical for us not to act quickly if we know we're risking that by not firing someone who's the wrong fit? So organisations often do come to reflect their leadership, again, as we've just been hearing, and the values of their leadership. But a business is not a person, it's not an individual. So the ethics of a business must be born from every employee, and they have wider reaching implications than the ethics and values of one individual. To have an ethical business, you will need to agree as a whole what your values are, and then only recruit and only retain those people that can demonstrate those values. Otherwise, it might be time to take the fines approach, or to put it another way that we commonly hear, hire slow, fire fast. Now, this might not feel or sound ethical. Does it feel fair to be thinking about firing people at this exact moment? We're all here presumably to try and be more ethical in our businesses. It makes it maybe difficult to commit to a set of guidelines, policies, or a charter, such as the recruitment charter, the ethical recruitment charter for Reading, when you start to think about the other side of the equation and accept that taking a stand means that some people would disagree with what you stand for. Now, I'm not advocating no second chances, and a good recruitment process should include sufficient tests and conversations to be sure as humanly possible that you've made the right decision. And it's also the responsibility of the applicant to be sure that the role is right for them too, or the existing staff member that the role is right for them too. And they share in this decision. Currently, candidates have more choice than hirers. We're constantly hearing in the news the headlines of the number of vacancies that are available out there at the moment. So they're even more responsible for their decisions because they've got more choices. So in summary, if you have an ethical recruitment process and a set of values that the whole company reflects and believes in, then you probably also need to know what happens when it goes wrong and how quickly you can act to correct things so you're not tied to the wrong person if the worst happens. Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. So now we move on to David Thomas, who is Thames Valley Regional Managing Partner for Vail Williams. And then after David, we'll have Rachel Eden. But David's first. So take it away, David.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. I think, we talk a lot about ethics in business, and particularly in terms of the property market. It would be very easy to assume that there aren't any issues, but with the legislation around anti-money laundering and knowing your client, you have to, from an HRC perspective, ensure that you are gaining all of the relevant information in terms of who is purchasing property. Conflicts of interest are very key as well in terms of ensuring that you don't have a conflict of interest, or if one exists, that you are managing those in terms of informed consent. You could assume that bribery is not an issue, but when I have surveyors who are being offered cash for inflating a valuation and rightly declaring that and saying, no, I'm declining to act on that, it is a very, very real issue. That not everybody within the market is abiding, but we are heavily regulated, and we need to ensure that we are at the highest level of ensuring we're completely transparent in what we're doing, even to the point of connected persons, of understanding that the risk of any bias in a situation. It is very, very real on a daily basis in terms of what we're dealing with. And I think the point from our perspective is, going back to what Dominic was talking about, nobody wants to be an Enron or an Arthur Andersen. If one of our key objectives is to be a trusted advisor, without having trust, everything else falls away. And that is the one guiding principle that comes from our managing partner right down through the business, is being that trusted advisor. And that has to guide everything that we do.
Thank you very much, David. And now we're going to move on to Rachel Eden, who is the founder of Hollybrook Associates, and is about to take on new roles, I think, which she might tell us about. But so you're on mute, Rachel. You're on mute, Rachel. Okay. Hi.
Yes, I am likely to be about to become Mayor of Reading. I can't say it's a guarantee because it's a democracy, and the councillors in the next meeting, the council could vote someone else in. But the expectation is that I'll be moving from deputy mayor to mayor. But I will be continuing to run my business. I've called my my presentation, or what I want to say, size doesn't matter, or does it? Because I was going to say that size doesn't matter when it comes to ethics, but actually I think maybe it does in a strange way. I think if your business is small, if you choose to, it can actually be easier to be ethical. And if you take that to the extreme, if you think about some of the tiniest businesses that I work with, so I do work with startups, the business is literally them. So they call the shots. If they want to run their business in an ethical way, they can decide to do so. And I would actually say if they have business partners, I think actually it's even more important that they think about their values, because I'm sure we all know people who founded businesses, and it works, I think, when the founders share the same values and approach. So a quick bit about me, as well as the new role I'm taking on. I think Hollybrook is the smallest firm on the panel. I like to call us a boutique accountancy practice. I started the business in 2015, and literally everything about the business has changed since then. Our office, the people involved, the methods we use, even the product, and the main focus of our business. And the one constant has obviously been me, and the values I identified at the start of the business. And that's why I think choosing your ethics is actually really practical, really important, because it's helped me to adapt and change over a period of huge change, both for me in my life and also obviously in the way the world has been. It's helped me find my customers, my products, to recruit, and to choose how we do things. I think the best day to agree your ethics is actually day one, and the second best day is now, just like planting a tree, which I know is a big ethical Reading focus. I actually agree with James that it can help you take really quick decisions, and that sometimes that can be really helpful in a difficult situation. And I think it's important to notice that ethics doesn't mean the same thing for every business, and really what your business ethics is about is deciding what really matters to your business. So what really matters to BAE is probably something, some of the values we will have the same, but other things will be different to what really matters to me in my business. And I think if your business already exists, and when I actually formally set my values, my business already had customers, already had suppliers. I involved the people who were part of my business, including actually a couple of key suppliers and customers. And what I found is that since having my ethics codified, it has helped me to stop, to reduce the number of mistakes I make. I think every business founder makes lots of mistakes, and I think you'd be unlikely to succeed if you didn't make mistakes, because you wouldn't be taking risks and trying new things. But it helps reduce mistakes. And I think it's really important to be honest about what your real values actually are, rather than sort of just picking out some words. The code of conduct that Dominic referred to from Enron is a really good example of where maybe a business wasn't honest with itself about what its values really were. And I just want to show an example, which is that one of the values for me in my business is the word ambitious. And that may not seem like an ethical word. Most of my other words are very sort of stereotypically ethical words, but ambitious was really important to me and also to my business partner. But it didn't work for some of our early subcontractors, and that helped them to self-select a little bit. So it helped us with our recruitment. I think it helps now with our recruitment, that we are an ambitious firm. We may be small, but we are very ambitious about what we want to achieve and the kind of business we want to run. In contrast to that, I would also say that I am also someone who really likes the easy choice, and sometimes being ethical can actually be the easy choice. And let me explain what I mean by that, because sometimes it seems like it's the hard choice. I find it easier to make quick decisions, or sometimes difficult decisions, by referring back to my ethics. It just shortcuts the decision-making process, and that can apply to recruitment. And also, unfortunately, I have had one firing decision to make in my time in the business. And again, I can completely endorse the point from the previous speaker that actually it does make it easier to if you use your ethics, because not just the ultimate decision, but also the way you do it and the kind of conversation you have is easier. And I do think also ethics can help your top and bottom lines. And a good example of this is I really have very little spend now on marketing, and also not just spend, but because of course in a small business, staff time is a huge part of your cost. It's also reduced my time and the time of my team. Obviously, we had a big issue, as many people did in the early days of the pandemic, around clients either shutting up shop or massively reducing what they needed from us. So we did have a big marketing push, because one of my values is to pay my staff fairly. One of the outcomes of my values is I want to pay my staff fairly. I am a living wage employer. So it was really important to get money in the door. We're not a big firm. We don't have huge cash reserves. But over the last 12 months, I was preparing for this, and I realized that over the last 12 months, every single new customer that we have had has come from either a referral from an existing client or a referral from someone who's worked with us in some way in the past. And that is the lazy way of getting new clients. And it's also a really successful way of getting new clients. And I would say, honestly, it takes a while to have confidence that that's going to happen. And it's very tempting to go for a scattergun approach, especially in uncertain times, in trying to find new clients. But having the confidence that that's going to work, I think, has come from the fact that we have a strong business ethics, and our clients are very loyal to us and really appreciate our ethics. They've chosen us because there are a lot of accountancy firms out there. They've chosen us because they like the way we do our business. And the final point, and I have to say this because I'm an accountant, I guess, but I really think it's important to think about how you measure your ethical performance. And I'm not going to repeat the points that previous speakers made about that, but I think in the discussion, I'd be really interested to know how people do measure their ethics. And I think for a small business, thinking about it from that perspective, looking at my client base and also how we measure our own ethics, some of the nationally created measures, some of the industry measures don't work for small businesses, and some measures won't work for a large business as well. So, for example, I'm looking at measuring my business's carbon footprint because I want to pledge to get to net zero. But what I've found so far, at least, doesn't seem to be designed for businesses who share premises. So if anyone's got any tips on that, I'd be really grateful. But I do think it's helpful to try and find quantifiable measures for your values, as well as qualitative measures, because you can't measure everything in numbers, much as I'd like to. So one of our other values in my business is learning. I think it's really important. And again, in a professional firm like an accountancy practice, that may not be a surprise. And I measure that in two ways. I have a numerical measure, which is to check how much training my team are recording in our HR system, whether that's formal training or internal CPD. But I also measure it in a non-numerical qualitative way by thinking about how many new tasks or new roles team members are taking on and seeing how they're developing in terms of the quality of what they do, because I monitor the quality of service really carefully because I think it's so important for our kind of business. So sort of a conclusion, I think having a clear idea of what my values were at the start has helped me build a business that suits the way I want to run a business, and also a business that has sticking power and will last. And I think that you can recruit new people, you can develop new products, you can develop new methods, and of course you can find new customers and suppliers. You can change your business completely in all of those ways. But I think if your values remain constant, you remain the same business, and you get sticking power, and you get loyalty, and your business will be more successful. And what you mean by success will be clear to you as well, because success means different things to different people.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So as I advertised at the beginning, I think that the best thing to do now is to go back to Dominic and ask for Dominic's comments on James, David's, and Rachel's remarks.
Very happy to do so. And Rachel, that was particularly fascinating. Hearing from someone who's started and runs their own business is always the greatest education you can get in this area, because absolutely it comes down to you. So yeah, they're fascinating. Thank you. I've got some specific points. Following up on James's point about sort of the character skills axis, and who do you recruit if you've got skills along the bottom and character up the side? Well, we ought to pick people in this top hand corner here. But when these guys are all gone, when these people are all gone, who do we pick? And you were talking about Ranulph Fiennes, and he's the guy that sawed his own fingers off, isn't he?
That's him.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to speak to a general in the Special Forces about this, who was speaking at a conference, and he said absolutely they would pick character. And I said, "Look, you're talking about the SAS here," and he said, "Yeah, we'd pick character. You need to have a baseline of skills, but if someone is particularly skilled, but I wouldn't trust them with my wallet, I'm not going to pick them. I'm not going to pick them when I'm putting a team together for a particular job. I am not going to put them on the team, because if I can't trust them to have my back, I don't want them there." And if that's true, if the SAS, will pick character over capability, I think there's a message for us all there. And your point about bad apples, there's a sort of stat. There was a study done in Australia. 1% of people are psychopaths. And by psychopath, I mean someone who doesn't care about the feelings of other people. Other people's needs and wants are not important to them. About 1% of people fall into that category. That rises to 6 or 7% in prison populations, and it rises to about 3 or 4% in big company senior management. So there's a lesson for us all there. And when you encounter one of those people, you get them out of your organization as fast as you possibly can. And in a big organization like ours, there'll be lots of them, because that's how numbers work. But the key is getting them out, because they will be toxic and they will destroy that part of the organization. And it's getting them out and getting them out legally. So 100% agree with that. Rachel, your point about behaviours and values, I thought was absolutely smack on. For me, values, too many companies, you talked about companies using whole sentences and we strive to be the best, blah, blah, blah. That's not a value. A value is a word like respect or integrity, or honesty or trust or humility. Those are values, and they're things that humans can really grab onto and go, yeah, I get that. I can buy into that. I can get behind treating each other with respect. I can't get behind being the #1 customer services firm in the Thames Valley. That's just it's such a nebulous expression. So I thought those value words were really good. Ambitious, I thought, was a really interesting one. I'm sure your company's obviously highly successful, and you've done very well, and you're growing and it's working. I bet Enron had ambitious as one of their values. I mean, it's one to temper, isn't it? And I was really interested to hear you temper it with the other more values type words. Is there anything you want to say on that, Rachel?
I'm happy to pop in the chat our values, if you like. Actually, I just went and googled them, and I haven't actually looked at it for ages because I know them in my head. But I've just copied them into the chat. Yeah, absolutely. Ambition was actually one which tempered all of our other values, because I realised that we weren't very dynamic if we just talk about, actually we have got innovation in there as well, but if we just talk about being honest and having integrity, which is really key to me, and it's really key to what an accountant is, diligent, competent, that doesn't fully capture what I think is important for our business. So those are our values. And you, as you say, one word is really helpful, but I have explained what the words is, because I think, for example, I don't think everyone knows the difference between honesty and integrity, and both are important. So honesty is being, I think, upfront and true to others in particular, whereas integrity is being true to your beliefs and principles, is how I define it anyway. So yeah, those are our values in the chat if you're interested. I think it works for us. And I chose to talk about ambition because I thought it's just a little bit different from what you might have expected from me. If you Googled my business and if you knew who my client base was, you might not have expected ambition to be one of our values. But ambition means something different for me than it might mean for someone else. You know, my ambition is not to be a multimillionaire. But my ambition for my business is that it is, you know, going to do something exciting and help our clients achieve. And I believe that if my clients succeed, then we'll be more successful. That's how it works for a service business. You know, if we make our clients successful, then they'll want more. They'll just bluntly, they'll want more product from us. They'll want to use us more. Absolutely.
Yeah. I really like what you said about the easy choice. The ethical choice is the easy choice because you know it's right. You know it's the right choice. We all know what's right and wrong. If you ask a 4-year-old what's fair, they know what's fair. They know the answer, and they'll say that's not fair. And the exception possibly of my youngest child, but they're very good on that. We know at core what's fair, what's right, and we'll invent all these complicated reasons why actually doing it this way is better and more important because it's, I know, making us more profitable, so it's keeping people in post and giving people jobs, and you've got to see the bigger picture and so on. But no, really, we know what's right. We know what's right. And your point about measurement, what gets measured gets done. Absolutely. Obviously, huge company, stock exchange, we've got all kinds of ESG measurements, which we publish in our annual report and accounts and carbon and everything else. What we also do is we measure the performance of our ethics program. So I talked about the ethics program as being the way to maintain people behaving ethically. And we measure the performance of that. How well is that doing? And the key metric for me on that is people's willingness to speak up when they've got a concern. So we get, my target is 10 people per 1,000 per year. So we get those kind of metrics of people speaking up via our ethics helpline saying, hey, I've seen something that's not right. Then we're on track. So that's our metrics. We also do staff surveys and various methods of measuring our ethics performance. Staff surveys, anonymous, and so on. But as well as measuring our kind of company output, we also measure how we're doing it, because that's where stuff can go wrong. So that's my response.
Well, thank you very much.
I agree with everything you said.
Thank you very much to Dominic and to James and to David and to Rachel. I found that very stimulating, and so stimulating that I'm going to jump right in with a sort of a brief story and then a question for David, if that's okay. So here's the brief story. I don't know, some of you may know, perhaps a lot of you know, that one of the most corrupt states in the U.S. is Louisiana. It always has been. It's famous for it. It almost, I wouldn't say revels in it, but it's a point of frequent comment. And I remember having a conversation with a man who was a surveyor in New Orleans, and he'd been very successful. And this conversation happened to be going on when New Orleans in particular and Louisiana in general were very much in the news. They had a very corrupt governor at the time, was manifestly taking bribes and got shot by his wife one night and all sorts of things. Anyway, so I'm talking to this guy and I said, well, look, how can you do business in such a corrupt city? And he said, oh, I've done really well out of it. I said, I can see that you've done really well out of it, but how have you done so well out of it? And he said, well, I've got a crook on the right and I've got a crook on the left. and they both know that I'm not bribable. So if the bank and the builder and the want to get a proper assessment of the value of this building, they all know that if I'm asked, I will say the truth, what I think is the truth, not what whoever's paid the largest bribe has given me. And he said, and that reputation for honesty, even in effectively a city of crooks, has done me very well, and I've just outpaced all the others who were bribable. So now I know that story you might think, well, that's a funny story about New Orleans, but it doesn't really apply to lots of other places, including, I hope, Reading. But David, when you mentioned that the importance of trust and the difficult and conflicts of interest, of course, come into it. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the Reading in particular as a property market and the ethical problems that crop up for Reading in particular.
I think that it's not something that is, but in particular to Reading. I think it is in particular to the UK as a whole, in the fact that, or even further. And you've seen with the Paradise Papers in terms of the ownership and tax avoidance. If you go through the ownership of most or many of the buildings within Reading, either in terms of commercial or residential, you will find that it is in some kind of LLP or other form of organisation that will be structured in a way, either headquartered in Luxembourg or in the Cayman Islands, from a tax avoidance point of view, and it is incredibly commonplace. The issue for us is ensuring that we comply with the HMRC guidelines in terms of ensuring that we understand who the beneficial owners are and who has majority control of them, so that we're able to comply with the regulations. But it is incredibly difficult because whilst many buildings may be owned by a pension fund, which is nice and transparent, a lot of others aren't, and that is a real battle that unfortunately at the centre of government doesn't seem to be grappled with in terms of the amount of foreign property ownership.
Can I just ask you a quick follow-on question? So if there's this building, and it is reported to you by the people you're interfacing with that the beneficial owners are so and so and so and so, do you have any choice but to just take their word for it?
We have to record. And whether it's through the land registry or whatever means, we have to record the actual ownership. What we then do is some further smart search or so on and so forth.
I see.
Try and understand who the majority control is, and we have then very strict regulations. If we suspect that there is anything unethical in terms of any money laundering, that we will, that you are then reporting that via our money laundering officer up the chain to serious organised crime agency.
I see. Okay, thank you. That's interesting. Right. So I'm going to shut up now and ask other people if they have questions or comments that they'd like to make.
Stunned into silence.
I have one, perhaps, to get the ball rolling. So one of the things I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as well, is that in particularly large organisations, actually no, any organisation, if somebody finds the consequences for a whistleblower quite significant and disheartening, actually, in most cases. So, you know, where there have been examples of major issues inside organizations, and somebody has come forward, and there are always good people inside organizations, there's always bad people, thank God, they come forward and they identify them with enormous courage and bravery. The consequences for them are quite severe. You know, there are numerous cases where CEOs have come forward. I remember one CEO of a Japanese company who identified major multi-billion-dollar fraud. And then people like that can't find jobs again, you know, and they're kind of effectively shut out of the jobs market. The implications on them, if they stay within the organization, are very severe, lots of sanctions and so on. I've just wondered what your thoughts are on that situation, what your organization does, and you know, how we could potentially address that, you know, as we go forward as a country, as a nation, perhaps, in terms of putting safeguards in for people like that. Obviously, we don't want spurious accusations, so there's the other flip side, but it's achieving that balance.
Should we go in reverse order? So from the initial presentation, so start with Rachel, and then go to David, and then go to James, and then go to Dominic.
Oh, that's harsh. I mean, let me take an analogy from my own industry, which obviously in accountancy, we have to be very careful about the sources of funds for our clients. And we, you know, we do a number of checks when we take clients on, etc. And there's two things. One is the anti-money laundering, and the other is counter-financing of terrorism. So basically, we need to check that the money isn't coming through money laundering, and we need to check that money isn't being used to fund terrorism, which, you know, is that's a sort of base level of ethics that if you fall below that, you really are in trouble, isn't it? You know, that's pretty basic. And actually, we were discussing this at my Members in Practice conference last week, about the importance of not having spurious or even you know, spurious reporting, because it means that it's harder to separate the wheat from the chaff. But equally, one of these things is actually just about making it easy, and this is really boring and processy, but just making it really easy to fill in the form and make sure you don't miss off all the information, because that's the other thing that can happen, is if people miss off the information or don't provide the relevant information, then actually the people investigating it may actually just, you know, think no further action on something which should have had further action. And let's face it, hopefully most of the time, most of us are not involved in this sort of thing. We're not, you know, I've never had to do an anti-money laundering report on my clients. I think, you know, so if I do, it will be the first time I've done it, and having a simple form that's easy to complete, especially if, you know, in my case, at least I am trained and I know the stuff and I do a refresher every year on it. But if it's an individual person Gurpreet's talking a more wide, you know, a wider society taking responsibility, it's got to be easy. It's got to be a process that's simple. And it's got to be really clear what you do and don't need to include. So maybe that's not quite answering the full question, but my perspective on it would be that.
David?
I think the point in terms of the points made earlier, it's about the leadership, and I think where, you know, it's having the confidence of where somebody is going to call something out from a whistleblowing perspective, that they are supported. I think the analogy, I think, is Matthew Syed had written into the book in terms of black box thinking, that from an aircraft engineer's point of view, they want to learn what went wrong with any kind of aircraft failure. Whereas endemic in the NHS, for example, is the fact that there is a culture of sort of cover up and not learning from it. And I think it's really where you are on the spectrum, or where your leadership is on the spectrum between those 2 points of having that a culture that is going, okay, we've got something wrong here, let's learn from it, put systems in place and move on, versus just sweep it under the carpet would be, it's those kind of decisions and that kind of leadership which is going to only improve, rather than create a situation which is self-destructive in a way.
James?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think whistleblowing as a word has immediate negative connotations now because of how it's been used in the media. So I think the first thing from an ethics point of view is to have a communication, a reporting structure like Dominic's talked about, and probably make sure that word is banned. And you've seen some interesting examples in the press, companies like Brewdog, what's been happening with them. Obviously Facebook constantly gets hammered with these sorts of things, but even in our local area, West Berkshire Brewery had who I know very well, and they've had some issues with people calling out the culture. And sometimes I think it can be a generational thing. So people that have established or leading businesses are of a different generation to those people that they are employing in certain roles. And you sometimes hear, I think, can sometimes be a culture clash, a differing of ethics. What matters to one group of people matters differently to another group, rightly or wrongly. Sometimes that gets covered up. Particularly Brewdog, the statement recently about, yes, we're an ambitious company, sort of wrongly using, one of the values that Rachel talks about. So the kind of, we're not making any apologies for who we are, that sort of approach. But then there are genuine concerns. And I think if you've got a business that is ethical and it is working by a transparent, well-communicated system of values and ethics, those people should be thanked, for bringing things to the company's attention, because as Dominic pointed out earlier on, quite often poor ethics is not necessarily a conscious decision, it's just a mistake, and someone saying, hey, have we noticed that that's on fire over there, should be welcomed. And so I think, other than dropping the word whistleblowing, I think transparent, clear, honest communication in publicly and internally is the way to manage that sort of system when it's the right sort of whistleblowing, but when it is simply a clash of ethics, a clash of cultures, then I think everyone needs to be mature. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about, actually, you probably just believe something different to me, and therefore maybe we shouldn't be working together, because it isn't going to ever work. And sometimes that's what I certainly see happening in some of these cases.
Dominic?
Yeah, I agree with all those things that were said. I've got a lot of examples here. Encouraging speaking up. We speak up. Yes, we don't use whistleblowing. We use speaking up. Whistleblowing is a pejorative term. It's also backward looking. You whistleblow about things that have happened, but you speak up to prevent things that might happen. And you speak up on behalf of your team, on behalf of the company, to try and prevent a problem. And I always say to people, every speak up case, a bit twee, every speak up case is a gift. They've given us information that we didn't previously have. We can fix a problem. They're speaking up to help the company. It's loyalty. Gurpreet, you're exactly right about so many sad tales of whistleblowers out there. And I think it was the Michael Woodford case you were referring to at Olympus. He was the CEO of Olympus, and he was intimidated into keeping quiet. I mean, if the CEO can be intimidated into keeping quiet, what chance have the rest of us got? And I've seen him speak. He's very powerful. And he says that if he'd stayed in Japan, he'd have been found dead. And had been found dead from an overdose of drugs and alcohol and jumping off a balcony. And that's what would have killed him. And he said, if you mess with triads, that's what happens. There is an absolute fear of retaliation. That's the number one thing that stops people speaking up. I went around Statoil years ago, and it's the only example of a high-level whistleblower who's been valued in the organisation that I've seen. And they pointed out to me, look, this is the guy that spoke up on Iran. This is the guy who told us what was going wrong. He helped the company. He saved the company. And he's been promoted and respected internally. And the Norwegians are amazing, and they've achieved this thing in their culture. But it is very unusual. You're exactly right. I talk to managers and I say, if you're not prepared to listen to bad news, you won't be told bad news. And things will get worse and worse, and then I'll get the bad news. And rather than having a conversation with someone in your team, they'll talk to me, and you'll have a conversation with me, or you'll have a conversation with your local chief counsel, and that will be a less fun conversation. The alternative to that is, if they don't know about speaking up to me, they'll go to a journalist. And then your conversation's really hard because you read about it in the papers and it's from your team. So encourage people to speak up. It helps your team. It helps you to run your team. It's an open team. It's a better place to work. It's a more fun place to work, and you solve problems early. There's a great example from the airline industry. I think David was calling out the aviation industry, is streets ahead in this. It's fantastic. And they've gone from a no blame culture to a just culture, and they're doing fantastically well. There's a great example from Malta, where EasyJet were flying an aircraft out of Malta, and one of the ground engineers said, "Oh, I think there's an issue with one of your engines. It's going to take you 6 hours to look at it." And they went, "Okay," got everyone off the plane, stripped the engine down. And he said, "Actually, no, it's fine." They rebuilt it, flew back to the UK. Someone from the Maltese airport then phoned up EasyJet and said, "I'm really sorry about that. It won't happen again. We fired the guy." And EasyJet's response was, "We are, from this moment, cancelling all our flights to Malta until you reinstate that guy. Because we want people to speak up if there's a problem. There's a 1 in 100 chance it could have gone wrong. Then the plane would have crashed." Yeah, we encourage people to come to us with potential issues. We had a case in our air business where an engineer assembling a Typhoon, doing some riveting, dropped a rivet, and it went down inside the wing. And his thought process, as he described it, is, well, this rivet fell down. Nobody saw it happen. Nobody would have caught it. We had to dismantle the whole wing to get it out again. We had to shut the production line. It was a nightmare. If I'd just stayed quiet, no one would have known. But maybe 1,000 flying hours down the line, something would have gone wrong. What do I do? And he said, well, he stuck his hand up and he said what had happened. They dismantled it and got it out. And he thought, I'm in trouble here. And at the end of the week, at the team wrap-up meeting, his manager called him out and said, "Jake, I'd just like you to stand up." And he thought, well, this is where I get it. And the manager said, "This is what happened. This is what Jake did. Jake is an exceptional employee for having done this. This is the behaviour I want you all to exhibit." And that is just a great example of rewarding someone who speaks up for the benefit of the team, the benefit of the organisation. There was a short-term hit, of course there was, but long-term, as an insurance policy, you just have to do that. Absolutely vital. But yeah, it's fear of retaliation as the number one thing that stops people. Now, we run an entirely anonymous helpline. People can phone a third party. They'll talk to a trained advisor there about their issue. It'll be recorded. Then I'll be sent details, or my team will be sent details of that case. And if they want to stay anonymous, they can stay anonymous. If we have questions, we send them back to the third party, and the individual can call in. They've got a reference number and get questions from us that way. So that works quite well. The other thing I do is I have conversations with reporters and say, of course you can remain anonymous, but if I know who you are, you're not anonymous, you're confidential to me, I'll be the only person that knows, but you're not anonymous. If you want to be truly anonymous, go away, create a new Gmail account, start emailing me on that. And that will be completely anonymous. And I will guide you through what to say and what to not say to maintain that anonymity. Because if you say, in a one-to-one conversation with Brad Hooker, he said, well, Brad knows who that was. So you need to be careful about anonymity. But yeah, maintaining that anonymity is that, and guaranteeing it, and guaranteeing non-retaliation which is really hard, is one of the key things. And we have an anti-retaliation program, and we watch for people and watch how their career has gone, and watch for promotions and pay rises and shift patterns and all those sort of changes that could be retaliation. But I don't know that retaliation is not happening outside work. And that's, are people no longer speaking to him in the pub? Well, I can't. There's only so far I can go. So yeah, preventing retaliation, absolutely agree. The number one thing on this. I've talked for long enough. Thanks, go for
it. So perhaps would somebody else like to ask a question or make a point? You can see my background as a lecturer because, the data on lecturers show that when lecturers ask the people in the audience, do you have a question? The typical wait is 1.5 seconds. If nobody asks a question in 1.5 seconds, they move on. Whereas, I've learned pause long enough.
I've got a question for Rachel. How many people are in your organisation?
I was hoping no one would ask me that. So it's a tricky one because we have 6 employees, including me, but 2 of them are extremely part-time at present for different reasons, but actually not unrelated, not related, but not completely dissimilar reasons, but they've chosen to be extremely part-time. And then we also have a couple of people who we call our associates, who are basically subcontractors. So we've currently got 3 subcontractors, but they're not working, they don't work for us full-time, but they're more like partners, really. They're people who I collaborate with to do big projects. So we're a micro entity, and my intention is we remain a micro entity in the formal, the legal term for what a micro company is anyone with 12 or fewer employees, and a turnover, and there's a turnover criteria and a balance sheet criteria as well, but that's our current size, and that's the right size for us at the moment. Yeah.
So for me, that you don't need all the stuff I've talked about. It's down to you. You are the leader of that organisation, that team, and there's 6 of you. So you can do that, and you can be that role model, and you can walk the walk, and you can talk the talk, and even virtually. Now you're no longer in the same place, but it's still, everyone knows what Rachel's expectations are. So we will meet Rachel's expectations. Rachel is the leader. Rachel is the hero figure. She's the founder. We'll do what we know Rachel would want us to do what's right. So we'll do what's right. And that it's when organizations grow beyond that and you get levels of management, I think that things get much, much riskier.
I agree with that.
Yeah, what's going on there?
I mean, I've obviously been involved in much larger organisations, and I'm currently in a quasi-leadership role at Reading Borough Council because I'm deputy mayor and going to become mayor. But I think the same thing applies, because I think actually it's easier if someone personifies the values, and I imagine even at BAE there are hero figures. I don't think of myself as a hero figure, and I know I picked you up on the use of the word guy at the top. I don't actually necessarily think there was a gender difference here, but I, for example, am very careful about my language. Actually, all but my partner, as in my relationship partner, who is also my business partner, are female employees. And that is not a conscious decision. I know some women who actually have chosen to run all female businesses. But I think that being visible doesn't mean that you have to be a macho hero. It's modelling the behaviour. And actually, I'm a big fan of the model. I don't think it's that widely read, but rather than servant leadership, I'm really into host leadership. And I think being a host is a really good model of a leader at any level in an organisation. There was a book called The Host Leader, but it's basically the idea that sometimes a host is that leader, is that visible person who makes a speech and stands at the front and welcomes everyone in that way. Sometimes they're in the kitchen making sure that things don't burn. Sometimes they're clearing up, they're sweeping the floors. They're doing all the different roles. And I think in a small organisation, that comes very naturally because, I remember when I had my first employee and her computer broke. And at that point, we didn't have an IT support contract with anyone. And she was telling her friend about it. And her friend said, "Oh, why didn't you ring IT?" And she said, "It's literally just me and my boss. Like, like who's IT?" That's the thing. You do everything, don't you? But I think as a larger organisation, I think it's worth thinking like that. To think sometimes I'm the big heroic fellow at the front, and sometimes the person in the kitchen. Those are important roles, and it's not that you should never be the person who's standing at the front getting the award or doing all of those things, but you should also not just be the person who's sat. You shouldn't never be the person who's in the kitchen cleaning up either.
I like that. It's a fantastic analogy. I hadn't heard host leadership. I'm going to go away and read up on it now. So thank you.
Yeah,
how many people does Reading Borough Council employ?
A lot fewer than we used to, but we're still one of Reading's bigger employers actually. So I think it's about 4,000 these days. And we, obviously that ranges from the chief exec, who's earning a really nice salary, through to our apprentices. We are a living wage employer, so we have a floor below. We actually had a Reading living wage before the living wage existed back in the 90s and the 80s. We didn't call it a living wage then. We called it something really techie and council-y, like a minimum floor standard. But basically, we employ people at all levels: apprentices, management, and also, of course, we have subcontractors. And I think we really reach out in lots of areas of people's lives. You can't live or work in Reading without needing the council at some point, even if you wish that you didn't.
It's an organisation when you start to get to that size, people's immediate manager become very important, and that figure at the top sort of fades away into, well, I never see her, so it's what's important is my immediate boss, maybe their boss, and the example they set. And that's where you suddenly come into needing that.
It's a really good example as well of diffuse leadership, because we have a political leader, we have a chief executive, and we have a mayor. So the mayor is very much a figurehead. As the mayor, basically your only power is if there's a council meeting where there's a tie in the vote, and you get to vote. You get to cast the vote. So you're like the Speaker of the House of Commons, really. You don't have power like sense. Obviously, the leader sets policy and is a political figure. And then the chief exec is actually the day-to-day manager of people. So that even enhances the diffuseness of the leadership. And I think it's really important then that those three elements come together. And I think what James said earlier about how if your values don't work together, you're going to struggle. And I think it's really important that those three, particularly the leader and the chief exec, to be honest, the mayor is less important, actually have the same values and are going to set the same message. And then, as you say, recruit, and that's where the recruitment point comes in, doesn't it? That recruiting for those values is vital.
I think as well, it's something that needs constantly looking at, because people's values and ethics change as they go throughout their life. I think back to I've been doing the job I do for 17 years, and I valued different things when I started and was 20 something as I do now. A bit over 40 with a 2.5-year-old little boy and stuff, and so different things. So, and I've certainly seen as well. You need to, I have managers that work for me, or team leaders that work for me, and you need to look at them and how they are operating for their more junior staff, because to your point, Rachel, whether or not you think of yourself as a role model, you are, because the people that are more junior to you will be looking at you, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, to how you tone of voice, how you act, even little things. That the guys point is interesting. I say guys, and I mean it, gender neutral, and it's just been a bit of habit thing. When I worked for a large American company, I had a senior HR, I think she VP, executive VP of HR, and she was in the UK for a period of time, and she decided to sit herself next to me. And I would stand up on a morning and say, "Okay, guys, let's all go in the meeting room. We're going to have a quick chat about whatever we're going to do over the week." And she pulled me up on it. She sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You know, there are women in your team." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, you said guys." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I said, I sort of said to my team, you know, I'm not just referring to the men, right? But it was, it made me think about, actually, it had never crossed my mind until that point. But now it makes you think about different people's perceptions on points and how they operate. And also the fact that you need to be constantly aware of even the small things you do are leading and perhaps demonstrating your ethics. And I've certainly seen some people, if they've been going through a very difficult time in their life and their behaviours change because of that, you can see over a period of 6 to 12 months that behaviour starts to feed into their team, and the team starts to do the things that leader, that team lead, that manager is doing. But they are going through a difficult time in their life, and then they need support and help, and that should be part of an ethics policy as well. So it's not just it's right, it's wrong. It's right, it's wrong at a certain time, but what is the context for that behaviour as well? And sometimes people need that arm around them as well. So it's I think it's it's a very, very complex thing to get right, and it needs real transparent and open communication at all times.
Can I just say about the guys-girls thing? I really feel strongly about this, that as a leader and someone in a leadership role, you have to watch your language. And I would say this as someone with white privilege, the same thing applies. Like, I have to be really careful. I mean, actually, my two team members who are more or less full-time are actually both from different ethnic heritages to me, and I'm really conscious that if I use language that is not inclusive of them, or I make analogies, or I do things that are not inclusive, that has a chilling effect. And I think the same applies with gender. I really do. That I'm a very strong and upfront woman, and I really don't, I will not take anything lying down, but a lot of women will feel, even subconsciously, a chilling effect. And I think it also affects the men and how they behave. And I think, it's tiny, and in no way is it a problem in the sense of it's not a problematic thing, but it's really easy fix to just think about our language as leaders, because as you say, the way a leader talks to their staff has a disproportionate impact than if just another member of staff does. And I'm always conscious of this. If I'm annoyed about something, or something's happened in my business that's gone wrong, because things do go wrong, or we haven't served the client, because I'm so all about quality. And if we've disappointed a client, I feel really, really upset. Actually, Ethical Reading are a client, so I hope that we haven't done that to you recently, because I really hate it. But I have to be very moderate in the way I respond to that in front of my staff, because I want them to feel that they can come to me if something's gone wrong. And there was a particular situation actually recently where something did go wrong. We fixed it. The client never knew about it, but we thought something had gone wrong. We fixed it. We made it work. And in her CPD, my team member said that my manager had been very calm and reassured me and made me feel that we could make this work and that the client would be okay. And I was thinking, thank goodness that that's what she thought was going on, because what was going on in my head was, you idiots. And I think that that's something we have to be aware of. And I think it's the same with the guys-gals thing, is that it's disproportionate, and we just have to it has a disproportionate impact if we're in the leadership role.
Good. Thank you for picking me up on it, Rachel, because it is a mistake I make, and I'm desperately working on it. But it's an honest mistake, but it's a problematic one, and it can lead to people feeling excluded. So thank you. There was a question from Jerry there on, well, what if someone's ethical beliefs are kind of out of whack with yours? The Texas question. That's fascinating. There's a kind of triangle you can draw with personal ethics, societal ethics, organizational ethics, and where do you end up? And as an organization, we employ people in Texas, and we employ people all over the world. And I'm not telling them how to live their lives. but I am telling them when they're at work, these are the ethical principles to which we subscribe as an organization. And if your personal ethics disagree with the ones that are relevant to us as an organization, or your societal, then we've got a discussion, then we've got an issue. But yeah, absolutely, when you operate in different parts of the world, a great example, when I was in the oil and gas industry in India, and in India, there's a culture of agreeing with the boss. So we sent out a senior person to India, and they were literally looking at the map and saying, okay, so we're drilling the well here, right? And everyone went, yeah, right, yeah, you're the boss, yeah, that's right. So that's where they drilled the well, and that was the wrong place. And if the guy had simply said, please let me know where we're drilling the well, they'd have got it in the right place. But because they were unwilling to tell the boss he was wrong, that's where they ended up. So you have to be very aware of that and very conscious of local issues. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for their presentations this morning and also the questions and the answers to the questions. David, let me just tell you that I had a question which I didn't get to answer, so I'm going to come back to you personally later with this question. But I'm going to just take this quick opportunity to share the screen again, I hope. Here we go. But I recognize most of you, and so I know most of you know what I'm about to say, but what I'd like to say is that I hope you'll visit our Ethical Reading website, where you'll find lots of information, useful podcasts, webinars, discussions, blogs, and also news of our upcoming events. But thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope to see you at a future event. Thank you. Bye.